Hi, I'm Shari Guilfoile. I'm honored today to be speaking with Father Ron Rolheiser. He's the author of more than 10 books, a speaker, a columnist, and president of the Oblate School of Theology in San Antonio, Texas. Today we're going to talk about his new book called Sacred Fire, and I want to just help set the stage. Sacred Fire is kind of a follow-up to his best-selling book, The Holy Longing. Now, both books focus on providing some really practical insights into the stages that we're all going to encounter along our spiritual journeys. The Holy Longing focused on the first phase. It's that phase that often begins in our late teens and probably extends into our 20s or maybe even our 30s. It's that phase where we're focused on getting our lives together. It's between the time when we leave the home we grew up in and the time that we establish our new home and our new life, and we sort of solidify our own adult identity. Sacred Fire picks up where the Holy Longing left off. It focuses on what happens after we've sort of established our adult identities. Father Rolheiser refers to this stage as mature discipleship. For most of us, this will be the longest phase of our spiritual journey. I'd like to welcome Father Rolheiser to the discussion at this point so that he can begin to elaborate on this really important phase of our lives. Father Rolheiser, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, good. Can you set the stage for us by describing what this phase of our lives looks like so our listeners can recognize if they're in it?
Well, it's really like, as you said in your introduction, we leave home really at puberty. We stay home a few more years, but puberty is designed by God and nature to drive us out of the house, that we eventually create our own house. So this phase of our life, mature discipleship, psychologically, I like to call it generative discipleship. Those are our generative years, the years when the people are responsible for paying the bills, doing the work, raising the kids, and on and on. We're doing the teaching, the building, and so on. So it's really all the years from the time you really marry or find your career, start having kids, until into retirement. And so it's oftentimes a 50 or 60-year length of time in your life. And those are the years where carrying life. So, this kind of image, little kids get carried by their parents, but the parents are doing the carrying. So those are the years where, you really are the person doing all the work. You're paying the bills, raising the kids, teaching, driving to clubs and schools, and running the politics and so on. So it's really the active years of our lives, as opposed to the preparation years. See, we kind of spend the first part of our life preparing. We spend the last part of our years in retirement. It's all those years between preparing and retirement. And I imagine a good number of your listeners, or most of them, that's where they are in those years.
Yeah, and so you say in the book, on the surface, sometimes, there's obviously this phase is jam-packed with a lot of stuff, but sometimes it can feel bland, or we can feel overpressured, or we can feel a little disappointed. Why might we feel that way?
Well, because first of all, it's a long period. It's a little bit, if I can use a metaphor, the difference between a honeymoon and a wedding. A honeymoon is short, you're young, you're in love, it's exciting. A marriage is a lifetime. And so so imagine just somebody reaches the stage when they're 25 and they leave it when they're 80. That's just a lot of years. And during that time, first of all, those are your working years. So oftentimes, precisely, it's experienced as a grind. Mm-hmm. You're raising kids, you're paying a mortgage, your alarm clock goes off at 6 o'clock in the morning. Most people today are pretty busy. And that we have words for it, the rat race, or I'm on the treadmill. And then during those years, see, that's the busyness part. But the other part is, and it's interesting, the great mystics point this out. They say that during the real generative years of your life, one of the biggest problems is going to be flat-out routine and boredom. You're doing the same thing over and over and over again. So it's like the analogy I gave. It's not the honeymoon, which is brief and you come home from. It's the marriage, which then goes on for 50 and 60 years.
Right. But you say, though, even though it can feel that way a little bit on the surface, if we take the time to kind of look within ourselves, there's some really good things that we see down below. We want to contribute to something bigger than ourselves. We want to contribute to our families, our community. Can you talk about that?
Well, very definitely. In fact, that's a very good point. See, even though it seems unexciting, it doesn't seem deep and so on. It's actually deeper than the fervorous part. So I'd ask your readers, your listeners, this question. Who's more in love, a couple who's been married for 40 years or one that's been married for 40 minutes on their honeymoon? Mm-hmm. I mean, the honeymoon is much more exciting. It's not that deep. I mean, it's really powerful. It's emotionally powerful, but you can do a honeymoon with a lot of people, But see, the couple who's been married for 40 years and, they're in a routine and they're being held in a kind of a ritual container called marriage. That's much deeper love than the young falling in love, which feels so exciting and is so emotionally charged. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I use it also for prayer. When you first ever get serious about prayer, you're going to have some fervors, months or years even, but you try to pray every day for the rest of your life. At a certain point, there's just going to be a lot of boredom and distraction and so on, but the person who's persevering in fidelity is deeper than the religious novice who's on a high.
Right. So there's some really good stuff deep down, but there's still some faults that we can fall into. You discuss some of those in the book. The idea of feeling resentful of all this duty, or like you said, the boredom or the struggle to forgive. Can you elaborate on some of those?
Very definitely. I do a section in there where I take, classically in Christianity and Roman Catholicism, we've had something we call the 7 deadly sins. And so like pride, lust, greed, envy, gluttony. Now, at a certain level, these things are very basic. So at a certain level, gluttony means I eat too much food. I can't control my drinking, Or envy, like you see little kids. I love their honesty, like toddlers. One kid has a toy, the other one just goes over and pushes them over and takes it away from them. But it's not that these things ever leave us. They just get ever more sophisticated. And so even saints have to struggle with them, because pride, just to use pride as an example, so that somebody who's really young, I mean, immature, not necessarily chronologically young, but young, immature in their spiritual or psychological life, that they'll puff up with pride, and it'll almost be an affront to people. But then you take mature people. What we do is, we become, quotation marks, humble, and then we can't help the fact that we get really, really prideful about our humility, like the famous parable in Scripture of the Pharisee and the publican. So the Pharisee is saying, "Well, thank God I'm not like that person."
Yeah, exactly.
I am a humble person, and so on. See, so these things just keep ricocheting back and recoiling on us, and you in this life you never fully get beyond them. They're always there. They need to be highlighted for good people. Really good, sound, your basic mothers and fathers and churchgoers and so on, who are faithful during those years. And the mystics point this out, psychological literature points it out. There the big problem is going to be resentment, bitterness, self-pity, a little bit like the image in Scripture of the older brother of the prodigal son. I've stayed home, I'm doing all the work, everybody else is acting out, but I'm this good person, all the responsibility falls on me, I'm chronically overworked, I'm working too hard, people take advantage of me. Where that's going to hit us, when right now, so many of us in the prime of our lives, we're resentful in many ways about all the work we have to do and the duties and things we have to carry. But I said we're going to realize what a great privilege it is when we're in wheelchairs and people are attending to us. We're going to realize these are the best years of my life. I should have appreciated them.
Right. No, I think that's so true. And I just want to tell the audience, I think that section on the 7 deadly sins, when you first look at them, you say, oh, that doesn't apply. But when you really read the descriptions you gave, it really hits home. Like one of the deadly sins is sloth, right? And most people today would say, oh, that's not me. I'm so busy. I work so hard. I don't have any free time. But you say in the book, it's it's not about being busy and productive. It's really about not doing the inner work or dealing with
Right.
moral and relational issues. Or you talk about greed and you say, you can be a non-materialistic person, but you might still be greedy because maybe you're not greedy for possessions, but you're greedy for status or reputation or experiences.
The example of sloth, in terms of, I can be a workaholic, in fact I am, and be very slothful. So it's not so much that, you think of sloth or, it's just some lazy person, drinking beer and watching football and neglecting his family or something. But you can be a workaholic, and oftentimes my workaholism is for me, it's an escape. It can be an escape from facing the deeper issues in my family, in my marriage relationship with God. Busyness in this life can be a great escape.
You also make it very clear that there is, one thing we can certainly count on during these years is that we're going to encounter challenges and crises. But that's not necessarily bad, is it?
No. It's one of my mentors used to say that you don't want the storm happening in your life, but woe if it never happens. We grow through crisis. And, or I give you another caption I like very much, comes from Freud. Freud once said there's only one body that has no tension in it, and that's the dead body. Tension is a sign of life. We shouldn't be looking for crisis, but crisis happening is about the only way we really grow deeply.
So the first part of the book makes it clear that, number one, we can count on having to face many challenges, and two, it warns us of likely pitfalls that we may experience. And what I like so much about that is that if we're aware of these potential pitfalls ahead of time, we can either try to avoid them altogether, or if we do slip into them, we can recognize them for what they are and understand why we may be experiencing them, and then we're more likely to get ourselves back on track. But you don't stop there, because you also make it clear that we're not left alone to deal with these challenges. As you point out, the gospel provides us with invitations and guidance on how to ensure that those challenges are actually nudging us along a path of spiritual growth. And just to touch on one, because I know that we don't have time to discuss all of them, but I thought this was just great. You talk about the invitation to remain steadfast in our commitments, and to do this by focusing on values rather than feelings. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Let's take the analogy of love. When you first fall in love with somebody, it's very, very much triggered by feelings. It's very, very much carried by feelings. So this is an attractive person, they're emotionally attractive, you love being with them, and so on. And you might even have completely different values. That's why sometimes we can fall in love with somebody who's completely wrong for us. But, there's powerful attraction and so on. Now that will give you a honeymoon. It won't give you a marriage. See, at a certain point, those feelings come and go, and then we have to ground it on values, so that to make this concrete. Let's say John and Martha are a couple. On the honeymoon, they're very much in love, and they're staying with each other because their feelings are strong. 20 years later, they might have a wonderful, a very good relationship, but they're not staying together because of feelings. They're staying together because of commitment. They're looking at each other across the table and say, I'm with you because you're a good person. We have the same values. We've made these commitments. We're raising kids together. It's predicated on values, but it's also true with our religious lives, If we go to church only when it feels good, we're not going to go to church a whole lot. We go to church because it's the right thing to do.
Right. It can apply at work. You have a decision to make. We'll first stop and say, what are my values? Not just how I feel about this situation, but step back from those feelings and make sure you get grounded in those values. And I think when you do that, you might make some different decisions and most likely better decisions.
Very much. So let me give you a very clear, personal, and strong example. Like, for instance, as a Christian, I'm against capital punishment. I just think Jesus invited us to something higher. And yet every time an unrepentant, violent criminal gets executed, I feel real good. It's like at the end of a movie when the bad guy gets shot. You know, you can't help but like that, but you don't make your decisions on the basis of feelings. I shouldn't say because I feel good when an unrepentant criminal gets executed, we should do capital punishment. I say, no, we shouldn't do it because Jesus said not to do it. Jesus said to forgive our enemies, forgive murderers, but that's hard. At the level of feeling, I simply can't do that. So I have to do it on the level of value, but that's true for work, or like serving the poor and so on. And Christmas Day, you don't go and work in a soup kitchen because it feels good. You do it for some higher reason.
Right, right. And again, for our listeners, that's just one, great discussion in here. There's many more like that, but we're about how to deal with, what we face at this phase of our lives. We can't keep going forever, unfortunately, in the interview, but I also want to just let everyone know, there's an entire section on prayer in this book and the positive role that it plays in supporting us during this phase of our lives. And there's a discussion of what Father Rolheiser calls the 10 Commandments for the long haul, which are different from the 10 Commandments in the Bible, because 10 Commandments in the Bible are kind of like a minimum standard, but these 10 Commandments for the long haul, it's like an invitation to how we can become, better people and reach a higher place and a deeper maturity. And then one of my favorite sections, you discuss what might be the ultimate litmus test of our maturity, which is the idea of blessing others. And we could do a whole interview on that topic alone. So again, we can't elaborate on all these, but I'm encouraging everyone to get the book because this book is so rich and just practical ideas for living the lives that we're all called to live. It's just full of invitations. It's not about rules. It's not about requirements. It's invitations that we can choose to accept or not. But if we choose to accept, they're going to help us move along our spiritual path. So, Father Rolheiser, first of all, thank you for writing the book, but also thank you so much for taking the time to join us to discuss it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks, Shari.